Hello and welcome on board. I am Michelle Khan and it is my pleasure to be your guide on our in-flight entertainment program, BWIA's World. You're in good hands with BWIA, and on this program we'd like to give you a taste of Caribbean Christmas, culture, cuisine and a sample of life in our world. You've chosen the airline that has served the Caribbean for 60 years since our first flight in November of 1940.
Hello friends, it is a great pleasure to have you on board this flight. You know, there aren't many airlines in the world, and certainly none in the Caribbean, which have been flying as long as BWIA. We are proud of our 60 years of continuous service, our unsurpassed global safety record, our international standards, an airline created and sustained by our own Caribbean people. The only Caribbean carrier to be profitable for the last 2 years. We are working on accomplishments still to come. To put it in aviation terms, we are approaching cruising altitude on a flight path to growth and sustainable profitability. The hub and spoke system that we introduced in June 2000 is proving to be highly successful. In addition to a very attractive schedule of direct flights, there is now daily connection between all our 16 destinations through our hub airports in Trinidad and Barbados. The process continues. On January the 7th, we will inaugurate service between the Caribbean and Atlanta, Georgia. There are many more improvements to come, and I will be keeping you informed about them. But for the moment, enjoy BWIA's world of choices. On behalf of BWIA's executive management, our chairman, Mr. Lawrence Dupree, and the board, plus the entire BWIA family system-wide, thank you for choosing the services of BWIA West Indies Airways. Season's greetings to you and your family. We wish you good health and happiness in the new year.
It was over 60 years ago that the dream of a Caribbean airline took off. BWIA's predecessor was born out of a need to keep contact open among the British-governed islands. A dashing and legendary personality, Captain Lowell Yerricks, a New Zealander by birth, was selected to set up the airline on a fixed budget. He named the young airline British West Indian Airways, a choice that reflected both his own British nationality and the raison d'etre of the airline to serve the British territories of the Caribbean. On Wednesday, November 27, 1940, a single Lockheed Lodestar with registration VPTAE on its tail left Piarco at 7 o'clock in the morning on its first commercial flight to Tobago, returning for a 9 o'clock departure to Barbados. BWIA, as it quickly became known, became a highly professional small carrier with a strong emphasis on safety and maintenance. BWIA's earliest pilots were highly trained professional pilots from the Royal Air Force, and among them were the first 3 Trinidadian captains, Ferdinand Jr. Farfar, Phil Kelshaw, or Captain K as he was fondly known, and Junior Farfar's younger brother, Esmond Farfar. Others, such as Herbert Steele from Jamaica, quickly followed. BWIA has flown the length and breadth of the Caribbean in good times and bad, providing vital service and communications to every corner of the region. BWIA has pioneered many of the Caribbean destinations that are now familiar names on the schedules of dozens of carriers, building the foundations of a modern tourist industry. In the 1960s, BWIA was acquired from its parent company, BOAC, by the government of Trinidad and Tobago for a sum of 2.5 million TT dollars. It was later privatized in 1995. BWIA has always conveyed the warmth and hospitality of the Caribbean through its service. In the early colonial days, the flight attendant's job was not open to everyone. Pearl Marshall Beard joined BWIA in 1956 as the first black flight attendant and the first to fly with an international carrier.
My landing in the United States at that particular time, it was quite a hurrah because the journalists were there in their numbers. there were about over 2,000 people on the tarmac. There were journalists, photographers, and people who were just genuinely curious as to who this person was. And all the newspapers were there, most of them were there, to find out the history behind my being chosen. BWI, as we will always refer to the airline, BWI is a West Indian institution. Nobody can ever forget BWI, no matter where you're from, what part of the Caribbean. BWI is BWI. And now that BWI has attained 60 years of service to the people of the Caribbean, and not only Caribbean, internationally, I would really like to wish the whole BWI family all another 60 years of total service as they have been given right now.
Pearl eventually served at the highest level as a member of BWI's board in the mid-1980s. Yesterday, as today, BWIA brings the warmth of the Caribbean to each of its international destinations. Now celebrating its 60th anniversary, BWIA carries over 1 million international passengers a year and is the most frequent flyer between North America and the Caribbean. Heading into the new millennium, the airline has introduced brand new factory-built, advanced technology Boeing 737-800 next-generation aircraft, together with a short-haul feeder service consisting of 4 state-of-the-art Dash 8 quiet turboprops, which will sustain the long-haul jet system. BWIA West Indies Airways offering you, our valued customers, a wider world of choices. We thank you for your continued patronage and commitment.
Hi, I'm Natasha Jones. Welcome on board, friends. Thank you for choosing BWIA as your carrier. It is indeed a great pleasure to have you on this flight. We'd love to give you a taste of Caribbean life, our culture, our cuisine, our sport. Welcome to our world, BWI's world. First, let's meet our President and CEO, Conrad Allium.
Hello, I am Conrad Allium, President and Chief Executive of BWIA International Airways. We're delighted to have you on board with us today. BWIA has had a colorful and wonderful past since our first flight in 1940. Since then, we have been working to develop our beautiful West Indian islands. If there's anything we can do to make you more comfortable today, please do not hesitate to call on one of our friendly and helpful flight attendants. Our vision is to be renowned for superior customer service, high performance, and natural Caribbean warmth. We have begun the journey. We're not perfect, but we're dedicated to you, our valued customer. Thank you for choosing the Airline of the Caribbean, BWIA, and we will see you again soon.
Well, hello there, folks. I'm Captain Steele. I flew with BWIA from 1949 to 1982, 33 years to be exact, during which time I flew on half a dozen different types of aircraft, starting with a Lockheed type and through to the 707, Boeing 707. BWIA is coming up to its 60th anniversary, which I think is a considerable achievement of any airline, especially taking into account its phenomenal safety record. And I'd like to just say congratulations to BWIA and wish them all the very best for the next 60 years. And we are looking forward to seeing all you kind people on board our aircraft. Thank you very much. Well, as a matter of fact, at the age of 18, going 19, I was working for Pan American in Jamaica, in Kingston. In those days, they had flying boats. That was it. No, there were no airports in Jamaica then. And I used to have to go to the airport and greet these flying boats and see the crew coming off, and the captain who was a tin god in Pan America. And you know, it was very impressive. So that actually was at the beginning of the war. Well, in 1941, I decided to leave Pan American and attempt to get in the RAF. So they had a selection system going in Jamaica, just as they had here in Trinidad. Excuse me. And myself and another boy were selected to go over. And we departed Jamaica by boat, a sugar boat, a 7,000-ton sugar boat, tiny, called the Lombardy. We went into the north coast of Cuba, a port called Nuevitas, which was a big sugar port there, and stayed there a few days, getting more sugar. From there, we went to Halifax to pick up the convoy across to the UK there. It was a very slow convoy, 7-knot convoy, because of all the old boats that they had, particularly this Lombardy. You know. And, well, en route, that was the height. This was 41. Mm-hmm. This was the height of the U-boat Atlantic warfare, and we had several encounters with the U-boat packs en route. Fortunately, the Lombardy wasn't considered very important, being so small, and we were never attacked. But boy, there were a lot of boats sunk in those in that convoy en route over. And well, we eventually reached England. Now we should have continued on around the east coast of England to London on the boat, but but the first port we got to was Oban, and was this Oban, yes, on the west coast of Scotland, which is big in oil these days.
Yes,
as you probably know. And they decided, and I was very happy about that they wanted our cabins for more gunners for the going around, because the east coast, down the east coast of England those days was very dangerous territory with the German
U-boats and
and aircraft. Not U-boats, but sort of torpedo boats.
Right.
That would come out from their coast. So we got off in Scotland, in Oban. We went into a restaurant there. I always remember this because we couldn't understand a word that they were speaking. We went to a restaurant that the waitress was saying, and they couldn't understand us too, broad Jamaicans, you know, in our dialect. But the menu was in English, so there wasn't any problem in reading and ordering what we wanted. And then that evening, we were put on a train from Oban to Euston, overnight train to Euston. There's no room in it you stood all the way because there was just no seating room on them. You know, all the narrow corridors were all filled with soldiers and airmen and people like us and normal civilians.
That must have been a good 7 or 8 hours.
Oh yes, it was all night. We got into London, into Houston in the crack of dawn, about 6 o'clock. No? Now we had been told in Jamaica that we could go to the YMCA, which wasn't very far from Houston, in the Russell Square area. So there were no buses at that hour, and very few taxis. So we trundled along with what bags we had. And we got to where the YMCA should have been, but it had been recently bombed out. So there was no YMCA. Anyway, we found some digs in a boarding house pretty close by, and that was our arrival in England.
1941.
41. It took about 8 weeks, 2 months from Jamaica via Cuba, via Halifax, and then across the Atlantic to get to Scotland.
Right.
Very long, very slow convoy. Well, in Halifax we had a few days actually while the convoy gathered.
So at this point you joined the RAF.
At this point, you weren't actually in the RAF. You had to go to Kingsway House, I think it was called, whereby you had your interviews and your medicals, and it was after that you were either accepted or not accepted. Well, fortunately, we were accepted. Then the next progression was to go by train. Now, this is a delightful part of England, down to Babbacombe in Devon, which is on the cliffs overlooking the south coast, and just above Torquay. So we did what is called a receiving wing there. You got your uniforms and your gas mask and all the rest of the shirts, ties, everything that went along with it. And
all the jams. And all the jams.
Oh yes, yes. Did you tell them about that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, well, that's where you got your
The
inoculations.
Russians,
And you were lined up, 100 in a line, and they would come down and jab you in the chest with the needle, and you could see people passing out afterward. Those a bit further down, and seeing sometimes they couldn't hit the right spot, and the needle wouldn't squirt the juice out, so they'd have to go in again, and some fellows couldn't take that. They'd faint. But that was all done. Then we did square bashing there, marching, PT and that sort of thing. Some classes on what the RAF was all about, etc. Then the next stage of that was just to march from Babbacombe, not very far, down the hill to Torquay, where then we went to what is called Initial Training Wing, an ITW. And that you did about 6 weeks there, of more square bashing and more detailed work on the RAF, classroom. And then when well, strange enough now, talking about other people, he was a pilot with BWIA. I was very friendly with him in Jamaica, but he and his family went to live in England long before I ever went across. We were in touch with them on and off, but I didn't know. I knew he had joined the RAF, but I didn't have any idea where he was. And just walking through the street one day into Torquay, who should be ahead of me but Johnny Purchase? And we discussed old times and so on, and went into the closest pub, the nearest pub, and did a little bit of celebrating. And as I'll come to, I ran across him again, but in an entirely different area. So after this boring?
No, we just want to cover the RAF period and the years, and then into BWIA.
Okay. Well, from ITW, we're then sent to elementary flying school called EFDS. And I did that at a place called Anstey, which was just outside of Coventry. And Coventry had been, that terrible bombing of Coventry had occurred 2 months before we got there. And literally everything you've heard or seen about it was perfectly true. There was hardly a building intact in Coventry. It was in a terrible, terrible state. Anyway, I fortunately got through the flying part of elementary flying school. And it was then that our crowd was sent across to Canada for further training in the Empire Training Scheme in Canada. And we got a boat. We went across, very fast convoy this time, and no U-boat packs at all. We were moving fast, Hundreds of troops on these boats, each deck. These were large passenger cruise boats in peacetime, and all the decks were crowded. And you slept in a hammock. I was way down in the bowel somewhere. Your hammock was touching the fellow next to you. So any rolling of the boat, you would be knocking together. And it was, people were seasick, and it was not very pleasant. It wasn't a pleasure cruise. You had to eat in shifts because, they just didn't have room in the mess halls for you to all eat at the same time. Anyway, we got back to Halifax, where we disembarked there. And our destination, our group's destination, was at a very northern part of Saskatchewan in Canada called North Battleford, Saskatchewan. In those days, you couldn't get much further north. And it took us 5 days from Halifax to North Battleford, because we'd be shunted off the main line to allow express trains through and so on, So, and then you'd get off and they'd let you walk around the little town, wherever it was that you had arrived at. And but it wasn't unpleasant, actually. We arrived in North Battleford. And that's where we did service training flying school, which is the next stage of your flight training. This was done on different engine aircraft. In my case, things called Oxfords. And I think that we're now up to starting winter in Canada, actually. And so we're off. You would like to go on to? Well, I was looking, after I left the RAF, I couldn't get into BWIA initially. I'd applied, but they didn't require me at the time. But Danish Airlines was looking for pilots. So a bunch of us, actually a lot of us, I'd say they took on about 30 RAF fellows who had just recently been decommissioned, got out, demobilized, and off we went to Denmark, which was rather delightful. And I was only there for 2 years, actually, because in the second year, I got a cable from a friend of mine, a senior captain in BWIA called Frank Murray, who said, provided you're still interested in a job with BWIA, and that you go to the UK and get yourself then a B license, we are offering you employment. And that's what I did, actually, and I came to BWIA that way. I resigned from In those days it wasn't SAS. Each Scandinavian country had their own little airline. In the case of Denmark, it was DDL, or Dansk Luftfartsselskab. And
So you came to BWI in what, 1949?
in 49,
Right.
yes, in May 49,
And flew with them for how many years?
till I was 60, which was in 1982.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, let's talk a bit about that introduction as you came into BWI in 49, some of the people that, you started to work with. Right, so you came to BWI.
I'd like to just for a moment reverse gear a bit and go back to the Middle East and to Egypt and Idco Airfield, where we were stationed for 2 years. But of course we were up and down the desert as Rommel moved back, so our forces would move up, and so would the aircraft. But there was another squadron stationed at Idco at the same time as we were, a single-engine fighter squadron. I think then they were on Hurricanes. They later got converted to Mustangs, but at that time I think they were Hurricanes. And we had a cinema on the station under a tent, because everybody lived under tents. And one night coming out after seeing a movie there, who should I see ahead of me but Johnny Perch? It's the same friend of mine who I'd met in Torquay several years before,
Yes.
And then he introduced me to Tigger Smith, who was on the same squadron as he was. So there we were.
Small world.
Yes.
Yes, all right.
So then we're back to BWI now.
Yes,
yeah.
and the early days of BWI. What was it like then, flying with this young carrier?
Well, I've only flown before.
The mic, yeah. That's all right, leave it there.
I'd
Yeah.
only flown with Danish Airlines, so
Right.
that was the only time I had flown in an airline, and they were really just starting up again too after the war. So they were in a state of newness. But well, it was a nice experience. I mean, it was like going back to an RAF squadron, really, because most of the pilots were ex-RAF, you know.
Yes.
So you more or less knew them, or they knew you, and you'd met them in England, and so it wasn't a big transition to come to BWI where flying with pilots was concerned, because we'd all been doing the same thing just a few years before. So that made it very pleasant, actually. I say it was like going to a new squadron.
Did you think at the time that, BWI was just 10 years old, that you'd have stayed there, all your working life?
Oh, yes. I've never actually had any desire to go and fly anywhere else. I suppose the opportunities have offered, but the trouble with piloting, actually, and Phil will agree with it, is that if you change from one airline to another, they have what is called a seniority system, and you go right down to the bottom of the ladder if you change into another outfit,
Yeah.
So it's not generally a thing you want to do often, because you lose a lot of seniority.
Where were the routes at that point? Where was BWI flying to?
Well, I start in the South, Guyana, all up the islands, Grenada, not St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Antigua, St. Thomas, and occasionally, well, we always went into San Juan on the way to Jamaica, and then Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
From Jamaica, you went to Belize, and that was there. And then also from Jamaica, you went to Miami. We started.
Grand Cayman.
Oh, yeah, right.
A lot of island
course,
hopping.
Cayman. I mean, God, if we had only invested some money in Cayman in those days, oh, there was nothing there, absolutely nothing, except this 7-mile beach or 5-mile beach and one little small hotel on that beach and millions of mosquitoes. All the roads were dirt roads. There was no town. Georgetown was nothing at all. But so that was Cayman, yes. And none of us did anything about it.
Well, you seem to, the flights seem to be a lot of island hopping. What was the average flight like? I mean, what were you called upon to do? Were there restrictions on in terms of hours that a pilot had or crew had?
You know, it's a long time ago, and I imagine there must have been, there certainly weren't any restrictions on the number of landings you did,
Yeah.
as they are in these days, because we used to go up and down the islands in one day and do 10, 12 landings, you know, and take off. Yes, there was no restriction on the quantity of landings you did. And of course, there was no real comfort in the airplane because there was no air conditioning, say, to cool off in the cockpit. You used to have to slide your window open and stick a clipboard out to get a good flow of air in to cool you down. But hours-wise, I can't remember any limitation on hours. There certainly must have been, and certainly from the civil aviation point of view too.
Was there any one thing that stood out in your memory during that period? I mean, you know, while you worked at BWIA, what were some of the great memories that you had?
Wow, you really put me in the spot. I would say certainly one of the great memories of the early days was the camaraderie between the pilots. It was terrific because we're all ex-RAF. A few Canadians were in the mix-up, yes. There were a few Canadians. Yeah.
Who were some of the contemporaries then at that time?
Well, the most senior ones when I came here were Bill Cash, Jerry Grogan, Dick White. And then from there we came down to the next batch, which would be Phil, the two Farfans, Keith Mango, Desmond DeVertai, Noel DeVertai, and Jimmy Farquharson. And I'm sure I'm missing some people, you know, but I just can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were the nucleus of
The camaraderie, really, as you say, was important. I guess that's one reason the sort of family atmosphere made BWIA famous then and still now to this day.
I can remember all flights used to arrive at Piarco roughly within an hour in each other in the evening time, around 6:30, 7 o'clock. And George Afong had a little restaurant and bear garden just across from the old terminal, and we would wait for all the other flights to come in, whoever was first, you know, and sit down and have a few, there was no carrot in those days, but whatever beer was on hand, yes, and then filter off home. And then if things were not, you know, people wanted to do a little go and eat, well then we'd go to George Afong's restaurant in town, which was called Kimling, which was very close to Batu Garage in those days, and there we'd gather.
St. Vincent Street,
Yeah.
St. Vincent Street.
But as I say, you know, the outstanding part of it was a lot of camaraderie in those days.
Yeah,
And,
but because that feeling still
because it was small.
pertains to this day. 60 years on, BWIA celebrates their 60th anniversary, and there's still that sort of real closeness, that West Indian feeling. People feel that they're at home when they get on board.
Ah, yes, I guess. Well, that's thanks to to the cabin crew, yes, who certainly are doing a great job in that direction in creating that feeling.
As we
Yes.
talk about the flight attendants, there must be a few names that you remember that stood out. And you know, we mentioned the pilots, of course, but the cabin crew also did a super job, I guess.
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah. In the small aircraft, there were 2 pilots and 2 cabin crew. That was all there was. Well, as the next stage was the Viscount, which was still 2 pilots, but then you had about 3 cabin crew. And then into the pure jet area, when you had about 6 cabin crew and 3 pilots, because by then you got an engineer as well as the 2 pilots. Yes, it was. We're always very, very friendly, very pally.
You mentioned engineering there, and that's a very major area because BWI has an enviable record, safety record, and it must, of course, start with engineering being up to their P's and Q's. That they've never had a major incident.
Yes, as in any airline, I mean, there are problems that aircraft develop, not necessarily the fault of any engineering. It's just happens, you know, that something will go wrong. But I must say, one thing I've always appreciated, when I read about airlines on their on-time departures and on-time arrivals, I always think in the back of my mind, you know, I wonder how they achieve that, because there is bound to be delays due to malfunctions in aircraft, and in BWI, I know we at times had terrible record of keeping schedules. But it was due to that you would not accept, or engineering would not dispatch an aircraft which was not serviceable. That doesn't mean to say that it doesn't go unserviceable later on, but knowingly, dispatching pilots would not accept aircraft which, in their opinion, was not. Therefore, that leads to delays, which actually still happen to today, you know.
Yeah. But overall, you had great confidence in your engineers and the maintenance team.
Definitely. Oh yes, I would never go on a flight feeling that something hadn't been done to correct any defect in the aircraft. You have things, all airlines have them, called minimum equipment lists, which do allow you to depart with certain certain parts of the equipment which is multiple in the aircraft, unserviceable, but you have backup for that. And that is used, that's used, but as I say, it has to be, that particular defect has to have backup equipment. So from the engineering, from the piloting, I wouldn't say that any other airline has anything on us in that respect.
It must be pleasing that the airline, I mean, you were there in its infancy, like Captain Phil Kelshaw as well, but here it is 60 years on, the airline is still doing quite well and competing in what is a very difficult industry.
Sure, yes. It is, as you say, quite rightly, and doing well at it with a lot of competition these days, far more than in days gone by. And because you have the big airlines like American, and you have the smaller airlines like BWIA, Air Jamaica coming in, but I think they're holding their own.
Yeah.
I know that traveling up and down, I'm very happy to see the aircraft filled up, you know.
Yeah. And competition is healthy as well. It keeps us on our toes. and
yes,
we've got
of
to
course
keep
it does, yes. But you
on
know, there
top.
can be a limit to it. I mean, I'll give you an example. Air Jamaica starts a flight, direct flight from Kingston to Trinidad. But BWI has to reply to that because they still have their inter-island one going there. And then both aircraft are traveling with just a few passengers, you know. It doesn't make sense to me at all, that type of competition. So there's an example of the uselessness of throwing something. There just isn't the traffic to
substantiate
warrant
that, yeah.
6 flights a week, direct flights a week to from Jamaica to Trinidad or vice versa. So, I don't know who will give in first.
What else have we missed out?
I never was afforded the opportunity of getting on the wide bodies, which came, I think, in '78. Was it '78 or '79 maybe? I can't remember when the L-1011 arrived, but in that area. And it was decided by the powers that people in my age group who just had 2 or 3 years to go, they could not write off the cost of conversion onto the wide body. So we were relegated to what we had been flying all along then, 707. So I never got onto a wide body jet.
And now, of course, it's a lot easier for the pilot with the new cockpits of the next generation aircraft.
Makes your mouth water to hear what they have in those aircraft. You know, you literally, having taken off from Piarco, don't have to touch a control until you land at Heathrow.
That's amazing.
By that I mean manually fly the airplane at any stage of the game. It can all be done automatically.
It's a far cry from your day.
Oh God. Certainly is, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be there and you have to keep setting up the aircraft for each stage of the flight, navigationally, and tuning in the necessary facilities as you go along. But actually handling the controls, you don't need to do it until after touchdown. That to me is a great thing because you can land in such low conditions.
Yeah, okay.
And it does seem to be reaching a conclusion in the United States. And but you have amongst the pilot fraternity a problem. The older pilots coming up to retirement want the age limit extended. The junior pilots don't want to see that at all because it means they can see all those dollar signs in front of their eyes disappearing if we'll, for argument's sake, it was extended by 5 years to 65. That means those who should have gone up to be captains when those others reach 60 are going to have to wait another 5 years, and they don't like that at all. So they are not keen on pushing that legislation through. And I would say they are in the majority in the unions, you know, because there aren't hundreds of pilots coming up to 60 all at one time, but there are hundreds of junior pilots waiting for positions, because every time you get a promotion, so the fellow below goes up in seniority. So that has been one of the stumbling blocks, I think, in increasing the age limit. But it's going to happen eventually. It's going to happen.
Where do you see BWI in the future?
Well, I certainly hope to see it continue on its present course of expansion. I believe, I'm not really into what is going on, but I believe there are some other routes that are contemplated, and particularly in the United States, which seems to be logical. That's where the nucleus of passengers are really. And I see they've just developed association with the United Airlines, which of course it will be helpful in both delivering passengers to United and United transferring passengers to. As a matter of fact, when I came down recently, I am sure that a large number of passengers had just come from a United flight onto BWIA. Because they all came on at the same time, and they looked like they'd just transferred from another airline. And I could see them one leaning out the window saying, "Oh, my bag has arrived," anyway, seeing it going into the hold.
So route expansion and big alliances with major airlines
I think
essential.
those are two very important factors of it. A small airline, I think, has problems in you have to have the same staff at each station, but to deal with only a small number of flights, as against a large airline which has hundreds of flights going out from the same station. Mm-hmm. So there are economics in it which are not advantageous to the small operator. But I hope they're going along the right path, certainly, and that we can make a go of it.
Great. I think we covered just about everything there.
Yes, I think that's best then.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, hello there, folks. I'm Captain Steele. I flew with BWIA from 1949 to 1982, 33 years to be exact, during which time I flew on half a dozen different types of aircraft, starting with a Lockheed type and through to the 707, Boeing 707. BWIA is coming up to its 60th anniversary, which I think is a considerable achievement of any airline, especially taking into account its phenomenal safety record. And I'd like to just say congratulations to BWIA and wish them all the very best for the next 60 years. And we are looking forward to seeing all you kind people on board our aircraft. Thank you very much. You think that's all right? I don't know.
And action.
Okay, I'm Captain Phil Cowshaw.
Okay, just sorry. Alright, go ahead.
I'm Captain Phil Cowshaw, who joined BWI in 1946 after spending 6 years in the Royal Air Force in England. That was wartime flying, BWI was peacetime flying. I stayed with BWI until 1968, at which time I retired, having been through the rank of co-pilot, captain, training captain, operations manager, technical manager, and then finally general manager. That was a marvelous experience for me, and at all times I was very closely in touch with what was going on in the cockpits of BWIA's plane. Being a pilot myself, I had a special view of that. We were then very proud of our
Okay, sorry. That's right, we could edit. Right,
What does he want? Yes.
right.
In those days, we were very proud of our performance record, and in particular, safety record. And I am very happy to say that that has been maintained throughout the years. And I would like to wish BWI all success in the world going on to their 60th anniversary. I really never thought I would see that day, but here I am, still at 80. And I have a few more years to go, perhaps. And I want to see BWI go right on into the future.
Of course, the tradition continues with your son carrying on your flying boots and flying as well.
Yes, well, it's one of these things, I suppose, that that happens to families, and that if you're a doctor, maybe your son becomes a doctor, or so on and so forth. Well, in this case, my son Stephen joined BWIA before my retirement, and actually I did have the opportunity of flying with him once, and he is now with the airline, still with the airline, and he's in command, captain on a MD-83, and doing very well. I flew with him down from Miami recently, and I enjoyed the flight immensely.
And lots of other sons of
Oh
brothers.
yes. There's Phil Kelchaw, of course, who you've talked to before. Simon, his son, Ian Pereira. He has 3 sons flying with the airline. And Captain Foster, he has a son. Let's see, Heath, yeah, Captain Heath, he has a son with the airline, and Captain Junior Farfan has a son with the airline. And that's about all I can remember of
All right,
sons.
good. That's good. I think we got that in. All right, great.
Very good. Okay.